it's a bit like it being in a zombie apocalypse. Don't be the slowest runner, right? Don't be the
Yeah.
weakest organization. At least secure yourselves to a moderate level, because if I was a bad guy, I've got two choices. Do I try and compromise the company you've budgeted, have a proper cyber budget, and have spent that money wisely and protecting themselves? It's not just kids in basements anymore. It's organizations trying to make money. I will make more money by targeting the weaker company.
Behind every Microsoft partner is a story of growth, a story of ambition, and a story of people pushing themselves, their businesses, and technology further. Every week here on Microsoft Mentors, the podcast, I speak to business, technology, and thought leaders from across the Microsoft partner ecosystem, offering mentorship at scale to the Microsoft partner community. So let's dive into this week's episode of Microsoft Mentors, the podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of Microsoft Mentors, the podcast. And today I'm joined by Luke Elston. How you doing, Luke? You okay?
Yeah, I'm good, Ollie. I'm good. How about yourself?
Yeah, not too bad for what are we now? We're Monday afternoon recording this, so got the carnage of Monday morning out the way anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Been okay for me today, so yeah, looking forward to our chat.
Good. And I guess, Luke, for anyone that doesn't know you, it'd be good just to get a very quick sort of 30 seconds, who you are, what you do, etc., if that's okay, buddy?
Yeah, sure. So, my name is Luke, Microsoft Practice Director at a company called CyberONE. So we're an MSSP. My role, a few different hats. Broadly speaking, I own the technology roadmap for our company. So making sure that internally we're developing new tech and then bringing that to our customers externally. So do a lot in the technical pre-sales space as well. And generally just oversee anything to do with Microsoft from a delivery perspective also.
Always the way with practice director, head of lead roles. It's which hat am I wearing for this meeting, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And where I always like to sort of start these conversations, Luke, and anyone that's listened before will know exactly where I'm going with this. But I'd like to get a bit of a feeling as to sort of the journey that you've been on to get you into the role that you're doing, and a lot of that sort of early background I always find sort of frames the work that you're doing now. And you dove pretty straight head on into the Microsoft world right at the start of your career. So what did, I guess, university threw into those or that initial role at Microsoft look like for you?
Yeah, so, the way I like to tell my kind of starting story is that I did, I coasted through my exams in school. I didn't really apply myself. And what that resulted in is I didn't meet the requirement to enter uni at first. Luckily, I managed to get on a foundation course, and that kind of scared me into, trying to put a lot of effort into getting a good grade. I was extremely lucky that during that process, I managed to move on to a software engineering degree. And within there, I got a sandwich year. And even luckier again, I managed to get an internship at Microsoft. So, that was very fortunate. And from there, I then spent 12 months in the internship. They extended me slightly for an extra 2 months, I think it was. And then went back to uni, then rejoined Microsoft again on the grad scheme. So again, very fortunate to be on that scheme. And then spent total end-to-end about 8 years internally within Microsoft, always in engineering roles, later in my career in a more of an architect position. I also spent 2 years in PwC. So I did the classic thing where you're in Microsoft for X amount of time, you then leave and come back. So I left to go to PwC for 2 years. I joined there within their cyber practice, and my role was to kind of be the initial catalyst hire to build out their Microsoft capability within that practice. So did that for 2 years, then went back to Microsoft for 18 months, and then joined CyberONE, and essentially took my experience from PwC in expanding their Microsoft capability and brought that same kind of thing to CyberONE. And I've just owned that piece within our organization since that time. So coming up to 2 years in CyberONE now.
Yeah. And I guess when, just timing wise, when you landed at Microsoft, I guess for that first internship and then sort of beyond that after you went back after uni, that would have been right at the forefront of the explosion of Azure and its capabilities. I guess it
Yes.
was probably in its infancy when you were there in the internship, and then very quickly over the next few years went and turned into what we know it is now, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. So lucky timing again. So that in my internship, I was a support engineer for Internet Explorer of all things. Um, then when I joined the grad scheme, I did about a year in Active Directory.
Yeah,
And around that time is when Azure, the Microsoft Defender suite started to become a thing around that time in its early days. You then, a couple of years later, got things like Purview coming in. So I saw all of that change happening and managed to latch on to all of that. So I enjoyed cyber from day one, really. I'd never done it at uni, but I was lucky enough to be mentored by a guy within Microsoft who was extremely knowledgeable. I basically just emulated him and copied what he did and upskilled in all the Defender technologies and things like that. So very fortuitous timing, it's fair to say.
yeah, and it's interesting as well because around that sort of late 20 teens into sort of early 2020s, that's where we really saw Microsoft invest massive amounts in their security tooling, and probably took them from where maybe a lot of organizations thought we've got loads of Microsoft stuff and we have to do our security over here, and then fast forward to sort of where we're at now, and there's so many native capabilities within the Microsoft ecosystem from a security perspective that organizations can now use, right? And I imagine that sort of early grounding in things like Active Directory, 365 and Azure gave you the foundation to then really go and specialize on the security side of things then, right?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah, it was, I was originally just the Active Directory identity focus. Now, obviously, identity is a key part of security. And interestingly, I would say we've seen that come round again. So now you hear a lot of talk around non-human identities and the securing of those. In particular, people usually are thinking about agents when
Yeah.
they talk about those. And yeah, it's brought identity back into that center of security. So it's kind of come full circle over the last 5 or 6 years, I'd say roughly. But absolutely, I would agree with that.
Yeah, I think AI and security is definitely something that we can delve into in a bit more detail because it's a whole podcast episode in itself, like that. And I guess with your sort of career moving through PwC and then back to Microsoft as well, and obviously ultimately to CyberONE, where did the sort of the balance start to shift away from sort of maybe more hands-on engineering type work to a bit more architectural, strategic? What did that journey look like?
Yeah, so the big change was when I joined PwC. So broader set of responsibilities there. So when I was in Microsoft, I was what was called a premier field engineer that then
Yeah,
became a customer engineer, then a CSA, which was an architect role eventually. But when I was there, it was mostly engineering, so hands-on delivery to customers. In PwC, there was less of that. So a couple of the things that I did there was develop some actual service offerings, some go-to-market ready offerings around the Microsoft tech stack, using my sort of engineering knowledge around doing things like security assessments effectively against the Microsoft tech. So I brought that capability to PwC, um, and yeah, that was the obvious transition marker, I suppose, moving into more strategic roles. But ultimately, I took the biggest step in moving to CyberONE, where I haven't been hands on at all. So hands off, much more strategic, much more commercial as well. And that is the direction I wanted to go in. I think the reality is, as an engineer, there is a kind of cap on how far you can go in those type of roles. Architect is the logical next step, so I took that, and then from there, you have the option to maybe move more commercially, more strategic. And again, I was looking for the opportunity to take that step, and that's how CyberONE kind of materialized for myself.
yeah, yeah. And I think looking from the outside in Luke and maybe blowing your trumpet a little bit, quite a fast progression, I would say, from internship sandwich year in 2014, 2015 to Microsoft practice lead sort of 10 years later. Do you think there's any sort of, I guess, lessons learned or, advice or tips that you've picked up along the way that have helped you go through that progression, that other people that are maybe, earlier career in those engineering roles have got aspirations to become a practice lead, head of practice one day? What's the sort of Luke Elston special magic tricks to do that in 10 years?
Yeah, God, that's a good question. A few things that come to mind. So you have to, it's not going to happen by accident. You have to be a bit bold and put yourself in positions where you are asking for the chance at a different role. So asking for more responsibility. What I think I've been sort of good at, maybe accidentally, is continually asking for more. Okay, I've mastered Active Directory, I've mastered Defender. Now I want to master Purview. Okay, let me upskill in that area. Okay, now I'm fully capable across that tech stack as an engineer, but I've never done any design work or never really had the solutionizing aspect. So I want to do those things. Then in the move to PwC, looking at the go-to-market side of things, slightly salesy, a bit more commercial. So I think if you have a broad direction that you want to go in, you have to try and lay the path before you a little bit. And there's always luck involved, but you can make your own luck to a degree. I do believe that. I think being bold and asking for responsibility beyond what you're currently capable of and having a senior leader who trusts you to give you that opportunity to prove you can do it is extremely important. So definitely being bold in that regard is a huge part of how I've managed to get where I am, I suppose.
Yeah, I had a similar conversation with James Pearce, who's the CTO over at ATech Cloud. And he was a similar sort of, pattern to his career. And I think the trend there with you is similar to James in that it's, hitting certain maybe ceilings that you've put in for yourself, which is, I feel like I've mastered X, Y, or Z, and not being afraid to put your hand up and say, I want to do this, or looking for opportunities and going, well, actually, I think I've got capability to do that. Let me find a champion that can, get me in the right room, the right people to have a conversation about doing that. And I always find it's one of those things with careers is that I think you can be as passive or proactive with them as you want. And I guess sometimes people will be more proactive and sometimes they'll be more passive. And the same people can be proactive and passive at different times in their careers. But I think to see those sort of really fast career curves, you kind of do want to be quite proactive with it and, set yourself ceilings, set yourself goals, set yourself ambitions, put yourself in the right room and not be afraid to put your hand up and say, I think I can do that. Give me the chance, right?
100%. So it's interesting about the sort of reactive and proactive bit or the passive active bit, because I would say the first 5 years in Microsoft, I was completely passive. I was just doing the job.
Yeah.
And I'd log off at 5:00 and it would go out my mind. I wasn't overachieving. I was just achieving and just doing what I was required to do. And I was happy with that at the time. But for whatever reason, I had a change of heart, a change of mind, and I wanted to try and grow my career. And you can't really just be passive and expect career growth. The other maybe bit of advice I would give is you need to seek out leaders, people who will be willing to mentor you and take you on a bit of a journey, maybe take a little bit of a risk on you. You need to prove that you've got sort of the right personality or cultural fit within their business. And if you can prove you echo their values, they're more likely to bring you on board if perhaps you're not the finished article yet. So seeking out leaders, and specifically leaders, not managers, right? It's seeking out someone who can take you on a bit of a journey is really critical. So that was a huge reason why I joined CyberONE. It really was the reason, the leadership team within the organization. That's what attracted me to the business. There were other places that I interviewed for that are direct competitors to CyberONE, and then they were more mature businesses at the time. But I chose perhaps the slightly less mature business because of the leaders in there and we've grown massively in the last 2 years, and it's because it has the right people. So it's sometimes it's a bit wishy-washy. When you start talking about values, sometimes people roll their eyes a bit. I would have rolled my eyes, early in my career. I would have thought, you're just talking corporate nonsense, but actually being aligned with, senior people who can mentor you, being aligned with them on a value level actually will unlock opportunity for you. That's what happened to me at PwC and at CyberONE.
Yeah. And that brings us nicely into the here and now and CyberONE. So I guess CyberONE are a business that, from the outside looking in and from what I know, had historically been sort of a slightly broader Microsoft partner prior to the rebrand with CyberONE, and made that sort of strategic decision to really double down on that Microsoft security pillar. So I guess, did that sort of coincide with you joining? What was the sort of the entry route when you joined? Where was the business at? What did that look like when you started, a couple of years ago?
Yeah, so it definitely did coincide. So, I joined initially as a consultant, sort of a lead consultant, but very quickly asked for more responsibility, going back to my point before, because I just saw, a smaller organization, less than 100 headcount at the time. I can now be a bigger cog in a smaller machine. So, took that step to move into a sort of lead position. Yeah, I think when I joined, the company was doubling down on the Microsoft thing, and I was one of the key hires to make that a reality, as well as various other people. And we've just gone from strength to strength in doing that. I think there's something to be said for the specialization and going deeper and deeper into it. So, we do a very small number of non-Microsoft things, but it's because they're general cyber things, like pen testing, for example.
Yeah.
But we don't really do massive amounts of stuff with other technology. We have a bit of Zscaler, for example, but really 90+% of our customers and our services are all around the Microsoft world. So, doubling down into that has worked for us very well. It's also meant that when we're trying to demonstrate to Microsoft as one of their partners that we're committed to them, they like to see that really we only play with their technology, because they don't have to worry about us sort of positioning a competitor to theirs, because they know we'll position them. It also means that our customer base are all pretty much Microsoft houses as well. So there's a little bit, there's a cyclical nature to it almost. We may bring on a customer for one service, but because they've likely got an E5 license or a business premium license or what have you, we can then offer the whole spectrum of Microsoft services to them. And over time, we can grow our security partnership with our customers, which is our goal, right? It's to be their security partners. We happen to be a Microsoft specialist, but our job is to secure them ultimately.
Yeah, for sure. And there's definitely something to be said about that close relationship that you can build and foster with Microsoft when you are fully Microsoft aligned. It just makes total commercial sense for them as a vendor, right? To know, right, if we've got, X enterprise customer that is talking to us about security solutions. If we go to CyberONE, we know that CyberONE is just going to talk to them on the whole about our technology stacks, and they're not going to start going, oh, well, you could actually put that in AWS and do this with it.
Exactly.
And the journey of our business at Cloud Decisions is similar. I remember I actually had him on the podcast a few weeks ago, but a guy called Matt Lovell, who now runs CloudGuard AI, but at the time he was running Centric, and I went to meet him years and years ago in Nottingham. We were at the point where we'd started Cloud Decisions. We were and ahhing whether to go down the sort of the AWS route as well, in terms of, offering talent services to the Microsoft world as well as the AWS route. And Matt's advice there was, I think you should just go all in and just stick to Microsoft. Microsoft will then start being your friend. You'll then open up opportunities for you as well. And that's how the ecosystem really evolves. And yes, we know there's lots of multi-vendor partners in there that do very well. But I think if you're trying to position yourself as a niche player in a particular vertical, there's so many advantages from just being closely aligned. And how does that map across for you guys in terms of things like solution designations, MISA partnerships? How does that all sort of look in terms of the land of the lay for CyberONE at the moment?
Yes, so we're in a position now where we've pretty much joined, well, we have essentially joined all of those various Microsoft groups. So we got MISA, we got MXDR verified towards the back end of last year. Both of those are quite in quick succession as well.
Yeah,
We've, as of I think a week ago, officially joined the Security Elite program in Microsoft as well. And to do all of those, you have to have your designations and specialisation. So we've got all the right badges as well. We have a sort of internal view on this where we have a sort of pyramid diagram, and the different layers of the pyramid are the steps you need to take to be a big player in the Microsoft partner space. And we've now completed that pyramid. So we've done all the things on there that you really need to do. And that obviously gives you credibility just in the industry generally, but with Microsoft as well. And we're in a position where they are now bringing work to us, right? Bringing customers to us because they recognize us as a very capable partner. They know what we're strongest in, and they're comfortable in, introducing us to customers. So that in itself is a huge amount of validation. A lot of work has gone into the company to get us to that point, and now we're sort of in that club, that special group of Microsoft partners. It's a very exciting time for us.
yeah, and I guess is that part of your role to sort of keep that position underpinned, and because it's one of those things that it sounds like you've worked through that pyramid, and it's quite easy to go, yes, we've done the pyramid, but actually, and the way that it works with Microsoft, right, is if you don't keep that pyramid maintained and one of the bricks falls out, then all of a sudden, then one of the higher bricks falls out. And it's all about keeping everything moving forward and maintained. You don't just get MISA and keep it forever, right? You don't just get Advanced Specialized X and keep it forever. So does, I guess, that feed into your role in terms of what that looks like in terms of skills and development plans and certifications and those sort of things?
Yeah, for sure. So we have a chap called Ben, who's our alliance director. So he owns the Microsoft relationship from a sort of relationship level. But myself and Ben work very closely together. When we meet with the Microsoft product groups or their sales function or whoever it may be, it's typically both myself and Ben in that conversation. We take the learnings back to the wider business. And then from a technical standpoint, I kind of own that component of it. So, there's been, for example, to achieve the MXDR verified badge, we had to prove a bunch of things were true in our SOC. We had to be aligning to Microsoft best practice technically. So part of what I did is make sure and validate that was the case. Any gaps we had to resolve those, and then to evidence that to Microsoft. So those are the kind of elements that I would typically own. But there's so many stakeholders in Microsoft, and different people within CyberONE have different relationships with various Microsoft people because it is a full-time job just managing that relationship ultimately.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess from a technical perspective, and like we've mentioned, obviously Microsoft have really invested heavily in their security positioning now, and I think just by nature of how they've positioned their own solution areas at the start of this FY, which was cloud and AI platforms, AI business solutions, and then in the middle, security still set out as its own solution area. There's obviously a real agenda within Microsoft to keep that strong position in. When that flows through to, what does good security look like? If we take an example of, a typical CyberONE customer that's probably fairly Microsoft centric in terms of their landscape and their ecosystem, what are the sort of the core building blocks of that sort of strong security posture within the Microsoft stack with all the different tools that we've now got at our disposal?
Yeah, sure. So I'll try and take it in sort of chunks if I can, because
Yeah,
there's quite
for
a bit
sure.
to get into there. So I think more and more, so one of the main things that we offer as a service is an MXDR service based on Microsoft Sentinel. So 24/7 security operations. That has become a norm across all sectors to be looking for that kind of service. So Of course, the Microsoft product there is Sentinel, which is the kind of hub of the technology. But then you've got various spokes off of that. So Defender XDR, which itself has many sub technologies within it. You've then got to consider the data security side. So Purview, which again is a suite of technologies in and of itself. With Purview, you've then got the AI conversation. So we're seeing customers with, of course, Copilot requirements or just AI requirements generally, asking us to help them adopt it in a safe, kind of intelligent manner. What we're saying is that any adoption of AI generally needs to come with a data security mindset, because otherwise there's a real risk of corporate data being, hoovered up into an AI system somewhere, and that probably isn't going to be, well, I would say for virtually every business, that's not acceptable.
Yeah.
So you have to be securing the data, and that will naturally take you on the AI journey. You've also got, more mature organizations looking at agentic systems. So we've developed a bunch internally, but obviously the Microsoft stack, Foundry, for example, is a good sort of development ground for agentic elements. So we see a few customers doing that more advanced stuff themselves, which is really cool. But again, there's, you ultimately, and this again goes back to the non-human identities component, is when you're developing an agent, that should have an identity associated with it, a bit like, a human in a sense, because
Yeah.
that agent is a digital worker effectively. So you should be managing it in a way a bit like a human. So joiners, movers, leavers, for example, what happens if the original creator of that agent leaves the business? Is the agent still going to run and just continue to do something without any oversight? That's potentially very bad. We've also seen organizations they've broadly allowed all their employees to create agents. So you're seeing a sprawl of
Yeah.
agents. Some will be developed better than others. And who knows what data they're accessing, what they're even used for. If you're not securing the agentic identity that is the element that you can wrap a security sort of service around, you could be in trouble, really. So we're seeing trends like that emerging as well.
Yeah, and as a default, then let's say a business has got team members, employees that are building agents. Does if we're talking about obviously like within the Microsoft ecosystem and Copilot agents, as a default, do those agents sort of carry the permissions of the creator? Do they have their own permissions? How does that work in terms of what is that agent allowed to go and do within someone's environment as a default versus best practice?
Yeah, it's a good question, and the the answer is tricky because it depends. So depending on where the agent was created, it may or may not have an agentic identity automatically created for it. Now, Microsoft are working towards having that as a default behavior for all agents, but at the moment, that's not true. So, organizations who were early adopters of the various Copilot products likely have agents floating around that don't have an identity associated. And
Yeah,
those are the ones that could have no explicit permissions defined, which could also mean they have permission to everything,
yeah,
potentially. So there's a lot of danger there.
yeah. It's an interesting landscape to be moving into, isn't it? Because you've got, I guess, two playing fields really. You've got those external risk factors, bad actors trying to get into your environment, and now we're in a position where we're potentially, as organisations, got the ability to let very powerful agents loose on our organisation without oversight or management if you don't put the right policies and procedures and security around it in place.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I saw, we shouldn't forget as well that whilst we as the good guys are using AI, the bad guys obviously use it. And it's always a
Yeah,
cat and mouse game. They develop something and then the security industry prevents that from being abused. I forget the name of it, but something I saw a couple of weeks ago was there was a 0 day and AI was used to exploit it. and it was exploited in something like 27 seconds. It's one of the fastest ever compromises using a 0 day. What we're also seeing is that generally the things like dwell time and other metrics that you might sort of measure a cybersecurity incident around are all coming down because
Yeah.
attackers are using AI. So, as the defenders, as the good guys, we need to also use AI to combat that and try to react quickly as well.
Yeah, it's sort of like say it's always cat and mouse, isn't it? And wherever the defense technology gets to, the bad actors will then go, right, they've put up these walls here.
Yeah,
How can we use AI or agents or whatever it might be to carry
take it
out
a step
the action?
further. Mm.
Yeah, exactly. Where do you think? And I think this is it's a bit more of a, I guess, a thought experiment of where we could end up, right? But we're not far away. I mean, arguably, we're already there, where a lot of the things that we would have historically positioned as unreplicable by machines, i.e., face, voice, fingerprints, those sort of biometric things, which were always like the gold standard of a fallback to, well, Ollie's face is Ollie's face, and we know exactly what it looks like. With AI technology and deep fake, etc., we're in a place where a lot of that can be potentially manipulated as well in the future. So, where do you think we'll end up in terms of things like that, identity verification, really knowing that it is me, Ollie, sat in my guarded office in Derbyshire trying to get into my account versus a agentic version of me digitally in the ether?
It's scary, right? Because we as customers or consumers of, some of us might have a Gmail account or a Hotmail account, right? We all use the big tech giants. We all use their technology day to day, right? So even at a personal level, we all should be worried. Um, we're sort of reliant on those tech giants to, bring those features out before the bad guys get ahead of it, really. And I'm not
Yeah.
sure that will necessarily happen. I mean, we've seen within our SOC, I think it was late last year, there was a vishing attack, so an AI voice attack, basically impersonating a senior member of one of our customers, a bit, sending a voice note to somebody effectively, instructing them to do X, Y, Z, and it sounded like the person it was meant to be, faking. The reason is that individual had done a lot of webinars, podcasts, for perhaps, right?
Yeah.
Various other things where their voice and face are out there in the public. So it doesn't take much to train a model to emulate that person. And then you can give it instructions on what you want it to say. And you can then fire off a voice note to an employee within that business. And they think they're receiving something from the CTO or whoever it might be. So we've seen one of those in the wild. There's been a few in the public news as well over the years. They're becoming more prevalent. So it's really dangerous. I don't think there is a perfect answer, right? I mean, a lot of the tech companies or the AI companies are sort of building in a kind of seed into their, if you see an AI generated video, it has a bit of metadata on the video to identify it as AI. But as an attacker, there's no reason I couldn't fake that.
Yeah.
It would be trivial. So yeah, it's very difficult. I'm not sure I have a silver bullet for you on that one, but it's a problem.
Well, you've just made me more paranoid. The fact that they could quite easily take all my Microsoft Mentors podcasts and use them against me. But you're right, and it's interesting that voice one, because you can see exactly that scenario planning out. And I've played around with I think it's 11 Labs before, which is a voice cloner, and it was, if you didn't know me and obviously me listening to it, I was like, there's a few nuances there that I don't quite like. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't intonate like that. But if you didn't know me and speak to me on the regular, you would think it was me. And, I think it did that clone off a 2-minute voice clip. So you think about giving it like a much bigger data set, it would very easily be able to clone me from the hours of Microsoft Mentors that we've done over the last couple of years. So, might have to rethink that now.
Yeah. Well, one recommendation I'll give you, and as we move away from passwords, this may not be prevalent or as useful, but something I use is what's known as a double blind password. So I use a password manager that stores a fraction of my password, and then I memorize or write down the second half of it. So there's techniques like that there could be room for those who are very innovative in the security space to enable us to have a kind of double blind way of challenging face authentication or other biometrics or voice or something. So those concepts exist. We just hope that the good guys developing these solutions get there sooner rather than later, really.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess the final sort of bit on the AI side of things is I guess the bits that we've been talking about for the last 10 minutes are, I guess, built in and around sort of the corporate strategy of a business that is implementing AI, right? How can organizations, or how should organizations be managing that shadow AI side of things? So it might be that, they've invested in Copilot and everyone's got it and trained on it, but, Bob over in the developer team is using Claude Code. Jenny over in HR is using ChatGPT. Bob over in design is using Gemini. How do organizations manage that sort of shadow AI sprawl within different teams that are sort of outside of the corporate AI strategy?
Yeah, so the what some people might say is, well, you need to define an AI policy, what's acceptable, what isn't, and you should do that. But of course, that's not going to materially do anything. Those are just the rules you've set out. So
Yeah.
you need some kind of tool. Let's not forget that all those AI platforms are ultimately applications. So you can manage them a bit like the way you would manage an application. So you can explicitly block them. And that includes the web browser versions, right? They're just web apps, so it functions the same. So the Microsoft tool would be something like Defender for Cloud Apps. Zscaler would be a third-party example where you can decide which you can explicitly block the set and access, right? So the hardline stance would be to do that. You define in your corporate policy, we're going to allow people to use ChatGPT and Copilot. Those are the only two. Everything else we're going to explicitly block, and that will mitigate shadow AI. Now, there'll always be edge cases where a very tech-savvy person, an engineer in the organization may be able to spin up a private instance of a certain AI tool within Azure or in AWS. And then you would need slightly different controls to protect against that. But, that's a starter for 10, is let's just think of their applications, right? Let's block them in a similar way. Keep it simple.
Yeah. And what about, I guess, within that same toolkit, if a business is like, we know that people are going to want to use it, that's fine. You can go and use your own tools as and when. Are there mechanisms through the Microsoft technology stack that they can use to manage and monitor, put restrictions on sensitive data going into those different tools and things like that? How's that sort of look?
Yeah, there are. I would say it's, these are still emerging technologies. So the auditability of them is not perfect. Let's be honest about it. In terms of the Microsoft stuff, so going back to what I said earlier around any kind of adoption of Copilot should also be an adoption of Purview. That's because Copilot will honor the rules that you've defined in Purview. So if Luke tries to request a document and that document's encrypted by a sensitivity label in Purview, the AI instance will not be able to retrieve that for me because it's operating effectively under my permission set.
Yeah.
But whereas you, Ollie, if you requested it and you do have access to that file, you'll receive it as normal. So in the Microsoft space, Purview is the key to doing that. Outside of that, don't ask me.
And yeah, as I say, you could go on for days and days about the AI side of things, because it is, like you say, same with any emerging technology, right? Is that there's so many different avenues and dead ends and new openings to conversation that we can go down, and I think it's just one that organisations just have to be aware of, that their AI strategy ultimately has to be underpinned by a very strong data governance and security strategy as well, doesn't it?
100%.
And in terms of like a broader look out into the wild west of cyber, what would you say are maybe some common sort of oversights, or you going into organisations, trends that you see that actually are normally quite big risk factors for businesses or organisations, but maybe aren't necessarily on a lot of people's cyber awareness or roadmap?
Yeah, I would say data security generally, even just forgetting the AI thing, is where a lot of organizations are immature. I think a lot of the time it's a bit of a scary one to tackle because it's very complicated and each organization is actually quite different because the data is different. So a lot of businesses sort of push that, kick the can down the road. But the reality is most organizations, what makes them an interesting target is the data they have. Sabotage happens, but it isn't, unless you're C&I or a similar sort of sector, it's unlikely you'd be sabotaged just for the sake of it. It's more
Yeah,
likely that if you were attacked, it's for something that you have, which is going to be your data or some IP maybe. So data security is something that is always less mature than it should be. It is a big task to tackle, but organizations just need to bite into it and get started really. I think beyond that, traditional identity, traditional device management, organizations kind of have an understanding of those. There's a lot of skill and talent in those areas generally. So those areas tend to be more mature. It's sort of the often it's the changing in perception of how you secure an organization that matters. And that comes back to the SOC element that I briefly mentioned before, which is attackers will not come for you at 9 a.m. on a Monday. They'll come for you at 2 a.m. on Saturday or at Christmas or at some other
yeah,
public holiday in your country. And you can have all the greatest system admins, all the greatest engineers with all the best tooling. If no one's online and the tooling you have doesn't protect you, then you're screwed basically. So you have to have eyes on screen monitoring you every hour of every day. And the way you do that is through a SOC. So it's becoming normalized in the industry, well, just across organizations generally. But that's still an area of immaturity for a lot of businesses. It's expensive. Whether if you're going to stand it up internally, it's extremely expensive. If you're going to outsource it to someone like CyberONE, you are going to need a budget for it. There's no doubt about that. But what has to be weighed up is the potential losses of a breach occurring, and quantifying that can be really difficult. But understanding the risks, taking the evidence to the board, getting budget sign off, those are key steps in getting yourself secure. You need money to secure yourself, unfortunately. It doesn't happen for
yeah.
free.
No, for sure, for sure. And all of those bits that we've spoken about, like you say, that they're fairly complex and nuanced. And I guess for a lot of the time, for the technical people in the room that you and the team at CyberONE will go and talk to, it all makes sense. It's probably a little bit more abstract and difficult to digest for sort of the non-technical business stakeholders that you guys work with. And I guess that circles back round to maybe some of the stuff that you do within your role as the practice director, in terms of how do you sort of approach taking all of these, technologies, tools, all of these use cases of where they sit, and start to kind of bring that down into some sort of manageable, packaged, understandable offering to take to customers on the commercial side of things, which is, like we said, that's sort of where your role has sort of pivoted more towards in the last few years. So how do you approach that when it comes to, go-to-market strategies, service offerings, how you position it with customers that maybe haven't got the depth of knowledge on the technical side of things, but need to understand it conceptually to buy?
Yeah, great question. It's a hard thing to do. My I'm still very technically minded because that's how I started my career. So I've had to come on a journey to be able to stop just focusing on the technology and saying, wow, look how great it is. It does A, B, C, D. and actually translating that into here's the risk, right? Here's the language that the execs and the board need to hear is here is the risk to the business. Here is what potentially could happen if you don't do A, B, C, D. It's about showing where the value is. So, if we're going to do a piece of work around data security, the messaging shouldn't just be focused on, we're going to secure your data. It's about what we're stopping from happening, a data breach, right? Putting it in simple terms. It's explaining that there's always an opportunity cost with these things. There's the cost of paying someone like CyberONE to secure you. Then there's the option not to do that and to sort of take the risk. And there's an opportunity cost involved in that. If you don't secure your data, if you don't secure your business, what is the potential outcome of that? There's some ridiculously scary stats. I can't remember the numbers, but in the UK and generally these things get tracked. How many organizations go bust because of a data breach or because of a cyber attack? It's literally dozens of organizations every day. Now, a lot of them will be small, but it's literally dozens of businesses disappearing overnight. Occasionally we see really big ones in the media. So it's making it clear that these things don't just happen to other people. Sometimes it's hard to envision a bad thing happening to your company because it's your baby. You care about it a lot. You think you're doing everything right, but sometimes an honest conversation around where your gaps are, what the risks of those are, is what's needed. So being quite candid, I think, is important.
Yeah. There's an example. I think it was last year, whilst all of the big news was happening around M&S and JLR more recently, etc. I just remember because it really stood out. It was a transportation company or something in and around Northampton, and they'd been going for like 160 years. They had 700 employees. It was a really good, stable business. And one piece, I think it was around password security, led to a ransomware attack, and that was it. It wiped the business out. And you've got, it's a really sad story, really, of this 160-year-old family-run business supporting 700 employees, and because of ultimately probably an oversight on the cyber side of things, it's led to ultimately the collapse of the business, and that's the bigger opportunity cost of worst case scenario. And maybe it does feel like a worst case scenario, and it won't happen to us. But if it does, the risks were manageable and mitigatable if you took the right actions at the right time, probably, weren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. It comes back to that phrase, assume breach or assume compromise, right? Unfortunately, we do have to be pessimistic. And if you take the mindset that eventually we will have a cyber attack, it's inevitable, it's just a matter of time, that will change your mindset and you will actually start to realize how important it is to be secure, because it's no good securing yourself after you've been compromised. The damage is done. The things like M&S, JLR, all those big ones in the media, there's clearly there were faults there. Now they've had to pay corrective measures to fix those, but of course those businesses have lost a lot of money in the interim because of that. They could have failed as businesses, that we could have seen them disappear. The thing I would add as well that people don't fully appreciate is cyber attacks at that level, they affect the UK economy. Yeah. Because they put a lot of people out of work, even if it's only temporary. In the case of things like M&S, right? It shuts down massive parts of the supply chain across the whole country. And that stops loads of people from working, completely cuts off all kinds of money from the economy and has a massive impact on the whole country. So when you're seeing cyber attacks in the news, there is a failing of that organisation within our country to, keep us all collectively safer. So it's just an interesting point that people don't fully realise.
Yeah, that was the big one with the JLR one, right? Because JLR is obviously quite heavily built around its, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 supply chain. And when that happened, there was a lot of talk around, you've got the big news, which is JLR can't make, 100k Range Rovers at the moment, but actually it's the smaller businesses, the supply chain, that actually probably get hit a little bit harder. I think you'd hope, and I think the types of conversations that even that I've had on the podcast, but that you see sort of in the public discourse. I think hopefully with some of those bigger attacks that have happened, it has probably pushed the cyber agenda into maybe more non-technical stakeholders' awareness over the last couple of years. I like the analogy, which is totally true for me, which is, what was it, last summer? Two houses down from me, they got burgled, and all of a sudden, me and all my other neighbours now have CCTV cameras, and it's that same sort of analogy, isn't it? You'd hope that people seeing big organisations like JLR, like M&S getting attacked. Maybe the smaller businesses might go, maybe it is time for me to put up that CCTV to make sure that we are secure.
Yeah, it's really funny as well, that, because I imagine, the companies who sell security cameras, they obviously collect data on who buys them and when. For sure, they'll be able to figure out what areas have been targeted by crime recently, because they'll see an influx in people in your street buying their cameras.
Yeah.
So the interesting data point there, but that's a great analogy. It's very true. So, it's a bit of a cheeky messaging, but let's say you're an organization with sensitive data and you're in a particular sector or industry that is likely to be targeted. Well, it's a bit like it being in a zombie apocalypse. Don't be the slowest runner, right? Don't be the weakest organization. At least secure yourselves to a moderate level, because if I was a bad guy, I've got two choices. Do I try and compromise the company you've budgeted, have a proper cyber budget, and have spent that money wisely in protecting themselves? Or do I try and compromise the company who's done none of that, when they both have similar sets of data? It's obvious, right? I'm a cyber attacker. I'm still a business. I still function as a business, right? It's not just kids in basements anymore. It's organizations trying to make money. I will make more money by targeting the weaker company. So there is a level of at least be better than your competitors.
Yeah, it's like, I guess, walking down the street and testing whose front door's open, isn't it? Right, they're going to go in the front door rather than breaking into one. Cool. And I guess for you guys and CyberONE, if you sort of look forward, you've obviously got plans in terms of growth and what that your Microsoft practice looks like over the next few years. What's the sort of the roadmap look like for you and the organisation over the next couple of years?
Yeah, so we've just had our annual sort of agreement on our goals for the year. What we're trying to achieve as a business. Got some really high revenue targets, which obviously I won't share, but they're good ones to aim for. As an organisation, we are a cybersecurity company through and through, and what that means is we need to be on the frontier of technology. So we have a lot of focus this year on developing our own AI agents and various other AI-based components that enhance what we already do. So particularly in the SOC, which is the obvious use case for things like this, we've got our human SOC team, really highly skilled sets of individuals. What we're adding into that team is the various AI agents as their digital colleagues. Now, the idea is not to replace all the humans. I know people hate hearing that, and I hate it as well. That's not the right strategy. The strategy is you ramp up your humans, right? You upskill them, you make them more senior members of your security team, and below them you bring in AI agents that can do some of the heavy lifting. So as we know, machines are better at computing large amounts of data than a human is. Get the AI to do all that kind of stuff and summarize the information to the human, so the human can make an intelligent decision based on something that AI has served up to them. That AI obviously gives you that in seconds rather than minutes or hours. Yeah. So there's lots going on in our technology roadmap, which is the thing that I'm passionate about, which is improving our operational efficiency internally, but also improving the detection times, the response and containment times to preventing threats in our customer base. So, and often the operational efficiency internally and improved containment times externally actually go hand in hand. Those things happen at the same time, so it's a win-win for us and our customers. So I'm kind of owning a lot of that piece, which is my big focus for the year.
Cool. Sounds like good fun, good technical challenge to build into the wider operational model for you as well, which is bringing those two parts of your world together, isn't it? Really.
It is.
Right. Well, I always like to end the podcast, Luke, with Microsoft Mentors quickfire round. If you're up for it.
Let's go for it.
So they're nothing too stressful. Some of them will be sort of this or that. Some sort of just what's your favourite type question. So I guess if we start off with out of all of the Microsoft security products stack, what would you say is one of the most underrated or underutilized tools?
Ooh, that's interesting. Underrated or underutilized? See, I thought you were going to ask is what's my favourite, and now my mind is stuck on that.
Go on then. Let's see. What is your favourite?
So my favourite is Defender for Endpoint or Defender for Servers. Yeah, it's one of the first that I learned, so I just have a affinity for it.
Soft spots for it.
Yeah.
Cool. And what's one metric that every cyber security leader should be tracking in their organisations?
It's got to be, well, again, a technical spin on it. It has to be something like your mean time to contain or respond to an incident. You know, how quickly you stop it from spreading.
Yeah, cool. And more sort of conceptually, what did you say one of the biggest misconceptions about cloud and cybersecurity is?
About cloud, it doesn't necessarily make you more secure. There's risks in cloud that don't exist on-prem. You know, there was a thing a while ago where people thought on-prem's this scary, horrible place. Let's all move to the cloud and it'll get rid of all our security concerns. But it's just not quite that simple. So yeah, you can still be compromised even if your environment exists in the cloud. Don't assume you're totally safe.
Yeah, for sure. If someone is, or an organisation, business is looking to start moving the needle on their cybersecurity posture, what's one of the easiest first move that'll have the most impact?
Yeah, get a SOC. Just get a SOC. Don't make that the last thing you invest in. Make it one of the first things you invest in.
Cool. And then on a more personal level, I always like to dig into how Microsoft leading people are on the Microsoft Mentors podcast. Are you a Mac user or a Windows OS user?
Right, so I have a Surface laptop, so that tells you what you need to know. Yeah.
Yeah, you're fully in. Now, I always like to. There's some covert Mac users among us, Luke, and I like to try and
you need to just
fish them
delete
out.
the recording after they say that. Nope, disqualified.
Yeah, exactly right. And then when it comes to the Microsoft tech community, are there any sort of user groups you go to, podcasts, blogs that you listen to? Any people there that you think people should be following if they've got an interest in the Microsoft security space?
So aside from yourself, obviously,
Of course,
it's, for me, I spend all my time listening into what Microsoft is saying. So it's trying to attend community calls. There is an endless list of things Microsoft publish, and this is open to the public. You don't have to be a partner of theirs. It's spread across about 20 different web pages, but I just hear it from the company themselves rather than looking elsewhere for it typically.
Yeah, for sure. And final one, it's Friday night. It's been a tough, it's only Monday now, but when we get to Friday and it's been a tough week, what's the go-to takeaway in the Elston household if you can't be bothered to cook?
Big fan of Greek. My partner's Greek, so that helps. I like Thai food a lot as well. It's usually a toss-up between those two.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, big fan of Greek food. I went to a food market in Birmingham on the weekend, and we had that exact mix. I had a Thai platter, and my wife had a Greek halloumi flatbread and wrap.
Yes, that's a good choice. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Luke, thanks very much for your time. It's been amazing hearing a bit more about your sort of journey, early days in Microsoft, all the way through to what you guys are doing at CyberONE now. It sounds like you've got an exciting roadmap for the rest of the year. For anyone that wants to keep in touch with what Luke and CyberONE are doing, as always, I'll make sure that you're all tagged up and people can find you in the LinkedIn post and everywhere else that we put out the podcast. And in the meantime, best of luck with the next year, mate.
Perfect. Thank you, Ollie.
Cheers, Luke. Hopefully you enjoyed this week's episode of Microsoft Mentors, the podcast. Whether you listen to us on LinkedIn Live, on YouTube, on Spotify, or wherever else you listen to your podcasts, make sure you follow, like, and subscribe. Both myself, Ollie Ridley, on LinkedIn, our guests, and also the podcast. The more people that we know are listening, the more time and investment we can make into the podcast and bring more conversations with our Microsoft mentors and leaders from across the Microsoft partner ecosystem to our community. In the meantime, stay tuned and keep an eye out for next week's episode.